Hello. Welcome to another episode of Season 16 of the Horrific Podcast. We're two friends who live in different places but share a love for scary movies. In each episode, we both watch the same movie on our own and then record a conversation together about what we liked, what we hated, if we were scared, and maybe even some larger truths about why people watch horror movies in the first place. This season, the theme is B movies for C students. We're taking a break from the current trends toward elevated horror and examining the history of horror B movies and how they've developed over time. Thanks for joining us, and we hope you enjoy the episode. A couple weeks ago, we reviewed the movie From Beyond and talked about Charles Band in Empire International Pictures. And I feel like a lot of the stuff that we've done so far in talking about the progression of B movies over time has really become about some specific individuals who were like active in that scene over the last few weeks. And I think that makes sense from the perspective of we're now in the world where independent distribution is the way that these movies can be made and released outside of the Hollywood system. And I think that while that was still kind of a new avenue, there were a lot of opportunities for new companies to pop up and people with experience filmmaking who kind of had like that almost like DIY vibe for figuring out a way to just get it done and get it out there could really make quite a bit of money. And so this is the first time, though, that I feel like we're coming back to talking about the same person twice, but in kind of two different contexts a little bit. But it's the same old song and dance. So from the notes on From Beyond, we had Empire International Pictures was started by Charles Band in 1983 after he sensed the emerging theatrical market for independently produced low-budget horror and science fiction films. So this week we're going to watch another movie that was brought to us by Charles Band, but as seems to be the case with a lot of these guys, a new decade means a new company. Empire International Pictures actually folded in 1998 due to financial difficulties, but Band would go on to found Full Moon Productions the same year and just kept right on doing what he was doing. And so if at first you don't succeed making B horror movies, try again, I guess.
It is kind of interesting how you could just do that. You could just be like, you know what? This company no longer exists. I no longer have debt. I'm going to start my new company. We're going to do the exact same thing, just
but
better
with a clean slate. Yeah. Well, and I also just kind of wonder generally about the financials. Like, how wide open was the market? Because I have to think, like, if I started an ice cream shop and I ran it into the ground, and then I opened a new ice cream shop in the same location, why would anyone come there if they knew I was bad at making ice cream?
That's a good question. Well, maybe because under the new restaurant you say, hey, we use better ingredients
Marketing.
Now. It's a lie. Yeah,
he must have been a marketing genius. So anyway, I got a little obsessed, and I couldn't find a lot more information on Charles Band, but apparently he was doing something right in life because he owned the Italian castle in which this week's movie was filmed.
That honestly kind of trips me out that you could just buy castles.
Well, yeah, for sure. But also that you would make enough money off of running a B horror movie production studio into the ground to make castle money? I mean, like,
why are there not more castle, like, horror ghost movies out there?
Well, he did have other movies that were also set in his castle. So, I mean, you know, make the most of what you got. But anyway, yeah.
I guess so.
If you haven't put it together yet, we are doing the movie Castle Freak from 1995. And I'm excited to get into it. But before we get into even the introduction, I did notice something interesting on the Wikipedia page for this one.
Oh.
And this is about the director, who is Stuart Gordon. And it said, while preparing to work on Space Truckers, because that's the type of movie these people made. Director Stuart Gordon received the opportunity to develop Castle Freak. Gordon was in Charles Band's office and noticed a poster entitled Castle Freak, with a Quasimodo-like man chained to a wall behind, being whipped by a woman. When Gordon asked about it, Band replied, "Well, there's a castle and there's a freak." Band said he had no script, but if Gordon wanted it, he could do whatever he wanted with the idea as long as he maintained the concepts of a castle and a freak. So, does this mean that Band was doing the same thing that Arkoff did with like the focus groups and getting people to make the captivating movie posters and then just testing reactions?
Well, I absolutely think so. The other thing that just came to me was, we watched Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey, right? And it's about, so this dude's ruining like everyone's childhood favorites. But technically, I think Castle Freak is a loose translation of Hunchback of Notre Dame.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of overlap there, I think.
This is basically the Hunchback of Notre Dame right now.
But horrified.
Even worse. Even more freakish.
Yeah. So you're saying he was just picking a like kind of fairy tale type thing from people's childhood and perverting it to hurt them?
I think what happened, this I'm just guessing here, that he couldn't pronounce either Notre Dame or something, and instead he made it like he hated the Hunchback of Notre Dame, so he called it Castle Freak. This was when he was in elementary school. And then as the years went by, he forgot about how he can't pronounce Hunchback of Notre Dame, but he still had Castle Freak stuck in his head. And then he met Stuart, and he was like, "Hey, just make it a freak in a castle. That's all I care about." But deep down, it's because of his hatred for the Hunchback of Notre Dame's pronunciation.
Well, I didn't know any of that, so thank you.
I read it on Wikipedia.
Another thing I read was that when asked why he was prompted to make another low-budget film after having previously made them and getting more budget over time, Stuart Gordon, the director, responded that it would be his first film since Reanimator that he could release without a rating, and he had the ability to cast whoever he wanted and be given the final cut, and saying that, like, even though the budget was tiny, I had complete control. So what's interesting to me about that is the reasoning was that this was never slotted to be anything other than a direct to VHS release. And so in reading about it, I noticed a parallel to when the drive-ins had been a way for independent filmmakers to get non-Hays Code movies in front of people a few decades earlier. The VHS revolution was like just the newest way or the newest avenue for filmmakers to get unrated content in front of viewers. And there was clearly a market for movies that didn't play by Hollywood's rules. And so once again, you've got these independent filmmakers who are sort of in the B-movie world who are able to cash in on that. And so between Gordon's like excitement at the freedom of like the filmmaking and like what he could do with it, and then Band's hatred of the Hunchback of Notre Dame, they combined forces to create a pretty gnarly movie in 1995 called Castle Freak.
Yeah. I never thought about VHSs in that manner, but what's kind of interesting is I'm kind of doing that myself right now, because I feel like with the digital stuff that's coming out, they're going to start like removing content that might be like sketchy or something from like an older film. So like I'm buying VHSs because I'm like, yo, you can't do that to this tape. But just full
Hayden
circle.
Christensen wasn't even born for the first Star Wars.
Oh gosh. Let me ask you a question though. If I give you this project that you can work on, and I say, all right, here's the deal. I want you to develop this website for me. You can make it whatever you want. I know that's not what you like because you want details because you're pro, but it doesn't matter. Whatever you want. You can do whatever you want with this site. You can hire whoever you want with this site. That's ultimate freedom, right? You have the freedom. You could say, I chose this project because I got to pick whatever I wanted. But then I come in and I say, but you can only spend $100 a month. Do you actually get to do whatever you want? Because you're now under a budget.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
I think that we're getting screwed is where I'm getting at.
Well, I think Stuart Gordon got screwed.
Yeah, he got fooled. But anyway.
Good for him, though, you know?
Here's the deal, though. I'm just going to say this before the intro. You picked another banger, Daniel. Just another banger. I have
been on a little bit of a streak this season.
No, you can. I want you to say it with pride. Because the answer is yes, you have. Yesterday, when you were asking me what we want to do or what I want to do for the next movie, like when you text that, I immediately started like going down, like, you know, trying to find through the list of what I had, and it was just shit. It was just shit, like all of it, and it's like, how the hell, like, where's he getting this list at? Because everyone's been a banger, Daniel.
I feel like it helps, though, that we are very, very much in your vein of movies right now. Like 80s and 90s horror B movies, I feel like is your love language. And so the bar is not high for me to find things that you'll enjoy. But
yeah, you're right. But there's still good picks.
Well, thank you.
This is such an gnarly movie.
Really
I'm so excited to talk about it.
We definitely have a lot to get into. So I'm going to do a quick introduction, and then we'll get into the why would you even go on the trip with him if you were just going to be mean and start arguments the whole time? Wouldn't everyone have been better off, including you, if you just stayed home and cooled off? You're not wrong to be mad, but why would you insist on even going on that trip when you knew you were just going to make it terrible for everyone, Barbara? Details.
My chest hurts.
In 1995, Full Moon Entertainment brought us Castle Freak, a creature horror film starring Jeffrey Combs and Barbara Crampton, who were both longtime collaborators with Full Moon's founder Charles Band. This movie tells the story of a troubled man who inherits a castle in Italy and then travels there with his family to help broker a sale of the castle and everything in it. Turns out one of the things in it is a dangerous, deformed man who breaks free of his confines to terrorize the castle's inhabitants. This movie was made on a budget of around $500,000 in around a month and was released directly to video. It can currently be streamed for free with ads on Tubi.
I couldn't agree more. I'm just saying, like, you don't have to come along if you're just going to be a wet towel. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
It's almost like I'm going to go just so I can punish him the whole time, but really you're punishing your daughter the most. So why even do it?
I think it's teaching the daughter that money is worth more than love.
Yeah.
But that's neither here nor there.
But anyway, last season was all about 90s horror movies that weren't sequels or reboots or made on a high budget. And I think this definitely falls into that category. I think we also have a little bit more context around the thing that came up a lot with 90s movies, that there were a lot of direct to VHS releases that were low budget that were not very high quality. I think that now we're realizing, okay, in the larger story of B movies, that was a time where a new technology was introduced, which meant a new way to make money off of not a very, very big investment if you were a little bit good at marketing and could get some word of mouth going. But I was curious to see, how do you think this movie stacks up with the other movies that we watched for Season XV, where we talked about 90s movies? Was this one, would it have been like towards the top of your list or towards the bottom?
So I think last season I was, within those guidelines, I wasn't necessarily thinking B movies. Like, I think I was trying to find a movie that was trying to be mainstream under, lower budget, certain, certain guidelines. So because of that, I think that I would have probably dogged on this movie because it's not mainstream. Like, it's not made to be mainstream. I mean, that's the whole section that you were basically talking about before the intro was, we're starting up our own thing. We're going to do it on VHS, that kind of thing. So that being said, if I take those movies and I pull them over here to the B movies, because that's basically kind of what we had last season, this would have put whatever, like, what was it, 95? This would have put 95 higher up on the list than what it was.
So you're saying this would have helped 95?
I think so.
Well, because I was kind of going back and forth on it, because you're exactly right in that we had kind of a different perspective going through as we're looking for like 90s horror movies that we can recommend to people and say like, oh no, the 90s had good and interesting horror movie contributions. That's not really what we're going for this season at all. But I would still say this was like significantly better movie than, say, Rumpelstiltskin or a few of those other random ones we watched. Yeah. Pinocchio's Revenge.
Yeah, less childish, I guess, or maybe those. It just seemed like they were trying to be like a Chucky reboot or whatever. With this one, it was, you can't get too any more original other than Hunchback of Notre Dame, but this is a pretty original storyline we got. This
is not one that we've seen a lot. No. Yeah, there were definitely things about this one that made it stick out as unique amongst other horror movies that we've watched. One of them that I thought was interesting was just that, like, the daughter was blind, and that ended up being a really interesting plot device in some of this movie, because she is kind of wandering around the castle and she's not able to see the, like, I just have him in my notes as the Freak, but that doesn't seem like a very nice title. Did he have a name?
Oh, I've been calling him Fuckface in my notes.
Okay, good. Yeah, I didn't want to be too offensive. We'll go with that.
We'll settle on. We'll settle on Fred.
Yeah, so Fred was, sort of a lot of the movie when he wasn't like attacking people, there was more of like the unknown of like, what is he going to do? And so the fact that he could kind of stalk people or like hide out or couldn't be seen, I think just kind of built that sense of suspense and dread, which helped a lot when he did become more violent later on.
Yeah. Here's the other thing that kind of messed me up a little bit about this was People Under Stairs is similar, and yet at the end those guys help out.
Definitely.
They really help out. So it's almost like the dungeon people are saving the day. You don't get this with Fred.
That's true.
Still same freakish looks, but you don't get that with Fred at all. And because of that, like, I legit was going into this, like, my mind was thinking the opposite initially, because I was like, oh, well, anytime you got a freak in the basement, they're actually there to help. Everyone knows that. No, that's not the case. Not in Italy.
That's for sure. And that's an interesting point, though, because I feel like in the beginning of the movie, when you saw the old woman hitting him with the whip, and then like later when the daughter first wandered down and she like kind of came up to the edge of the jail cell, you almost felt sorry for him. Like he had kind of been just a victim. Yeah. Like he seemed like very helpless up until that point. But there was something about like that moment when his eyes open and there's like the close up on his eyes and on his teeth where all of a sudden he got really scary really fast. And then like shortly after that, he's biting off his own thumb so he can slip his hand out of the handcuffs. And it's just like, oh no, this is about to get really brutal and really graphic. And so just that quick contrast of how he had just been a complete victim to now he's like this hunter and how abrupt that was, I thought worked really well in the movie.
Yeah, like, oh, they did have him, chained up for a reason, or whatever the case is. Yeah. Did this one start with a? Didn't it start with like a scene from the people who lived there before or something?
Well, the very beginning was the mom going down into the basement, and then she like whipped him a bunch, and then like gave him his food, and then she like had the heart attack or whatever. So yeah, it was when they were living there together in the past.
Okay, I just want to double check because like we said, this is in my wheelhouse. So like I've watched a few other movies, and I just want to make sure. But the other thing that I thought was kind of intense about this, but the thing that I think that really helped it be a B movie and why it's perfect fit for this for this season is the fact that, like you said, it was low budget, but there's just that like undertone, like sexual undertone throughout the whole half of the film.
A little giallo vibe,
maybe like the second. Yeah, for sure.
But I think that's also part of the Arkoff formula. That idea of the
yeah. Uh-huh. Without a doubt. And I think that that can make movies better or worse. It didn't necessarily need it to add anything to it, but it definitely made for some gnarly, some crazy scenes. I don't know if this movie could have stood on its own, but still.
Yeah, it was weird. It was kind of weird character development because it was almost like Fred saw the main guy come home with like the prostitute that he picked up in the bar, and then he's trying to almost like reenact what he sees them do, and there's almost like a weird like innocence to it, almost like he's just trying to be normal, or he's just trying to like find love or something, but then of course it turns like super violent and everything. And so it was kind of a weird psychological thing of him trying to be more human almost, but then that only accentuating how like different and unable to fit into the human world he was. And so then there were the scenes where it's like, okay, that just becomes pure frustration, and then he lashes out and gets really intense. And so the first scene in this that really, really stood out to me, like burned in my memory, is the one where the woman was like sitting on the floor half eaten, and then Fred is covered in the bloody sheet and is just like savagely beating the maid on the floor. Everything about like the setup of that shot, and like even kind of how grainy it was, but just how like visceral it was. It really reminded me of like the darkest Rob Zombie scenes. Like I feel like this had to be such an influence on him in his movie making, and really on what we think of a lot when we think about like the tradition of horror B movies being on the more like extreme and graphic and kind of grainy, and really just going for that shock value on the lower budget effects.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the beautiful things about these lower budget films. Like I feel like one, you could kind of sometimes use that to your advantage. Like you can use the equipment that might not be the best quality, maybe make it grainy, or like the 100 Years of Horror, like the German expression where they would like use shadows and stuff like that, like using the lineage, and just because it's B movie, just because it's might be cheaper budget, doesn't mean that you're not going to have gnarly things happen. And like that scene that you were just referencing, the blood, the eye looking, there was a eye hole basically where you could see like part of its face, part of Fred's face, and then you had the blood. That was insane.
Yeah.
Like insert that into any other horror movie, like that's freaky as fuck. Like that's just it was perfect. And that whole sequence was just gut wrenching, for the most part.
Definitely.
But still, it was just like, you had like the acting was gnarly. Was not the greatest, but that's not necessarily what we're here for. Like, we're here to get these, diamond in the rough or whatever. And that scene, that whole sequence was just whoa.
It really turned
disgusting,
things up a lot, intensity wise.
100%. Yeah. And so it's like, it's amazing to me because it's like they're able to pull that off, with lower budget, imagination, DIY. Like, that was a sheet that had it cut out. Granted, there was like really good special effect makeup behind it, but still, like, at the end of the day, that dude just had a sheet over his head, a white sheet they may have stole from a motel or something. Like, I just love it.
Yeah, and the whole everything around it too. I mean, just with the practical effects with both the women and like the violence and everything that was going on, like that was just intense. And I think that
There you go.
And I think that there were a couple of spots in this movie where just everything came together really well to make for really intense, gripping scenes. And that kind of made up, to me at least, for a lot of the like bad acting and awkward dialogue and story that didn't make sense and all that stuff.
Right. Which by this point in this season, like, I almost feel like it's just like second nature to have that type of acting. And I don't even know if it's necessarily the acting or if it's the audio with it or if it's the direction that they're getting. Like, I don't know what it specifically is, because every one of these, they seem like they have the exact same acting types. Like, it's the same over the top lines, or there's just, it's very similar. But maybe I'm just like, so used to it now because of the season. But it's like, so it's almost like comical in certain scenes, and it's going to be funny. It might be meant that way, it might not be meant that way, but that doesn't matter. As long as they have crazy, horror scenes happening somewhere throughout the film, then it's good. I'm cool with it in this season. Because these guidelines, I'm firm, but I'm fair.
Yeah, and I feel like, we've been talking about the idea that at some point, B movies became their own kind of subgenre or like trope, where it's over-the-top gore. It's basically everything in the Arkoff formula, but just like turned up to 11, and almost with a little bit of like a sense of irony around it. And I think that kind of the bad acting or cheesy dialogue is just very much a part of that. Like, it feels right in this context, in the same way that, a slasher movie feels right having the guy with the knife and the jump scare and stuff. You know what I mean? Like, it's entrenched as part of what you expect from these types of movies. So it almost kind of stops standing out so much. Like, I think a difference between talking about this movie and talking about, Pinocchio's Revenge is, at the time, we were judging that just as a horror movie. It's like, this is hard to watch. Like, we've seen some really good ones this season, and this one stands out as being especially bad. But now that we're kind of like, in it, and we understand the subgenre and the tropes of that subgenre and everything, it really isn't quite as distracting with these for the most part.
It's actually probably a good thing that we did this season after the 90s, because first off, I think it made a good opener season for this one. Yep. Maybe that's why we're enjoying these a little bit more. But second, I think I would just be too mixed up just with the guidelines itself. But So here's the thing. What did you think about the ending with this one? Because I felt like it almost kind of slipped personally. Like, maybe it was because the scenes that were like leading up to that were pretty crazy. Like, one of my favorite scenes is when the blind guy, or when Fred is realizing that the girl's blind. Like, you see him like kind of move his hand in front of it, and it's like he's like piecing it together, and it's just like, I mean, it's just eerie, man. Like, it's almost like claustrophobic.
Yeah, the part where he was kind of like moan talking, I really didn't like. I think it would have been better if he didn't do that, because he just sounded stupid. But I think that when the mom, from the time that Barbara Crampton's character showed up and distracted him, and then she stabbed him, and then he like did a total 180 from kind of that I'm just trying to find a connection with another human to I'm a bloodthirsty monster. It was intense. Like when they were making the run for it and he was chasing them and it was dark and stormy, he was absolutely terrifying in that, and chasing them up onto the roof. And then that whole sequence I thought was really good. But then there was the fight that didn't seem super realistic. But you know, in the dad finds redemption by sacrificing himself to kill the monster. And then at the very end, you know, his funeral was the time that finally the cop has accepted that the child he fathered was really his. And that all felt a little too much to me. I mean, that felt very like out of character with the rest of the movie, but whatever, you know, like I wish it would have just ended like after the dad and Fred fell off the roof, because everything leading up to that was so like intense. And I feel like the classic B movie ending is just like, wow, everything's over, but nobody knows what's about to happen. What does any of this mean? We are given no real like sense of closure with any of this stuff. What just happened? Whereas this one kind of gave it that little tag at the end where, you know, the character arc of the dad felt like more the main story than anything else. And I just didn't really care about that. Yeah.
Yeah. I felt like he was kind of lost cause initially anyways, but no, that's spot on. I mean, it's just off, I guess, you know, just kind of wish there was maybe a little bit different, but all in all, man, this was a great pick.
This one was, I feel like, a very, very quintessential, like, oh, what do you mean horror B movie? Well, hold on, I got your answer right here.
Exactly. Yeah. Let me give you a little lesson.
You can't hang with this. There's the castle door.
Don't let it hit you in your castle ass, you candy ass. Wait, don't.
Just stay home, Barbara.
Barbara.
I feel like Barbara Crampton is a unsung B horror movie all-star. I've seen her in so many other random B horror movies that I've been watching just as like part of like absorbing the culture for this season.
I think it's worth it, man. I wish I could go down as a scream queen of B horror movies.
Well, and I feel like if you watch one B horror movie from the 80s or 90s, then Tubi will just keep playing more of them. And so you just keep looking up and you're like, wait, where am I now? What's happening? I was playing video games on the other screen. Like
that's why I love Tubi, man.
Barbara Crampton was great in Chopping Mall.
Wait, I saw that. I actually kind of want to watch the space, that one that you mentioned.
Space Truckers?
What was it? Space? Yeah, Space Truckers. I was like, I wonder if... Oh, yeah, I bet Troops has that.
And that's it for today's episode. If you've listened this far, then thank you, and we hope you've enjoyed it. We're always looking for new ideas, so if you have any questions, comments, or movie suggestions, please send us an email at thehorrificpod@gmail.com or hit us up on the IG. That's what the kids call Instagram. Just search for The Horrific Podcast. Thanks for listening.